Well, super excited to have Eric Voorhees. Eric needs no introduction, but I think it's famously known as the oldest man in crypto. And Eric is, his OGs. He's been pretty much in every important moment from the creation of Bitcoin. He's super excited. He's now, he's a big proponent of separating money and state, and now super excited that his same values are extended to separating money and separating state and intelligence, right? So Eric's latest project being Venice AI, which is a decentralized, permissionless chat system. In some cases, significantly better than Google's chat system, and excited that he's with us today. So to start off, Eric, I want to understand the side of you that most people haven't seen. Like, how did your upbringing influence you as a man now? When your speech at the Permissionless conference last year opened up a lot of us to your incredible values and how you look at the world, and I always wondered how you came to shape those values.
Yeah, hey. All right, I think this thing sounds fine, yeah? I grew up in Colorado, in the West. Like, I think that's part of it. I love seeing anyone with a cowboy hat. I think, I hope they never go too out of style. I basically was raised in, I guess, a moderately conservative family, and grew up understanding the value of markets and freedom from an early age. My parents weren't radicals by any means, but I think they've been proud of how radical their child has become. When I got into college, I hadn't really understood the degree to which money played a part in markets, and everyone just uses dollars by default without much examination. And I was, from an early age, considered myself a capitalist and a very pro-free trade, pro-market person, but I never questioned dollars themselves. And so post-college, I had moved to Dubai, and the global financial crisis back in 2008 was going on, and I started really looking into money and banking, and it was very much like one of those eureka moments of, well, of course, if you want a market-based economy, you can't have the most important good in that economy be centrally planned by the government. And that was just so obvious to me. But this was pre-Bitcoin, and I didn't really know what a good solution was. So there were a few years of just being kind of despondent, because I felt like I understood the problem that much of the world was suffering from, but I didn't have a good solution for it. So when I learned about Bitcoin, realized it couldn't be turned off, and that it was a plausible alternative, then everything just opened up, and here we are 14 years later.
Wow. And how did you find out about Bitcoin? It's a fascinating story.
How I found out about it is actually not so fascinating. I was in New Hampshire for the Free State Project, and a friend of mine posted on Facebook about it, some article. And so I clicked it, and I read a couple articles, and my disbelief and my skepticism was dissolved pretty quickly, I would say. And I just totally fell in love with it. And definitely had a few days with very little sleep, and learned it intensely. And it was actually interesting to see how quickly I could learn how Bitcoin worked, because I was so interested in it. And I'm not a developer, I'm not a cryptographer. A lot of the fundamentals of Bitcoin I didn't know, but I learned it all pretty quickly just because I had such an interest in it. And I've discovered this is a broader life lesson, that if you ever find that you're trying to learn something and it's taking a long time, it's probably because you just don't care about the thing. And when you have a passion for something, you can just absorb it very, very rapidly. And when you find those things in your life, you should pursue them.
It's awesome. So Bitcoin paper is not for faint of heart. It's not an easy paper to read, right? Did you read the paper, or did you read about Bitcoin and then read the paper? How is that sort of walk us through that day in the life?
Yeah, the white paper describes how Bitcoin works. But more important than that, I think, was just like some of the broader concepts of how a decentralized network can operate. And certainly the best way to learn something is to start using it. You know, like you could read about bicycles in a textbook for months and you wouldn't really understand how to ride a bicycle, right? But if you spend a few days doing it, there's an understanding that your mind gets just from that usage. So just like acquiring some Bitcoin and sending them to my own wallets, that was a huge part of the learning, and that didn't take a huge amount of technical skill.
Awesome. So 2012, Satoshi Dice, was responsible for half the Bitcoin volume. You founded that, or you were involved? What was that like? How was Bitcoin 2012 like? And
Bitcoin,
to be in thick of it, in fact.
Bitcoin 2012 sucked. Was anyone around back then in the Bitcoin community? Oh, no one. Okay. So Bitcoin 2011 was exciting because like that was one of the first bubbles where Bitcoin crossed through $1 and then went up to $31 over the course of a few months. And during that period is when I got involved. And then after that bubble popped, there was just this like horribly miserable, depressing slide from $31 down to $2 over the next like 12 months. And this was Bitcoin's first bubble, so all the skeptics, almost no one had heard of it or cared about it, but those who had heard about it had every reason to say that like this was just some stupid Beanie Baby fad, right? Like bubble was clearly over, bubble had popped, it didn't take over the world, it failed, and everyone who was still involved was just a total idiot. It was in that environment that Satoshi Dice got built, and if you actually look back at the transaction charts of Bitcoin transactions per day, you can see this miserable slide after the bubble pops. And then it's like dead, like a dead patient in the hospital bed. And then Satoshi Dice, which was a Bitcoin gambling game, arrives in April of 2012, and you see this like bump in the flat line of Bitcoin's transactions. And ever after that bump, the transactions just start growing forever. And so I do not want to claim that I like resuscitated Bitcoin from the dead, but it did feel good to see that and to really like be able to bring people a use case where they could understand why a decentralized system was cool. And back then, this was in like the wake of all the poker sites getting taken down a few years earlier. So like online gambling was a big topic. And when people realized that they could go to Satoshi Dice and just send Bitcoin into this site that a stranger had made and have their winnings or their losings sent back to them immediately from anywhere in the world. It was an immediate demonstration of Bitcoin's capability, and so for that, I'm quite proud.
Wow. So what was the development environment like in 2012? Like there obviously was the browser plugins. How did people? Was it non-custodial? Was it?
So this was pre Coinbase.
Yeah.
People would use custodial wallets, full nodes. Generally on their computer. I actually had a full node on my phone, an Android phone, and it barely could handle the whole blockchain. It was like 2 or 3 gigabytes back then. But yeah, the software was bad. There were wallets like InstaWallet, InstaWallet was amazing. Like basically, you'd go to instawallet.com or org, and it would create a unique URL, and that URL would become your wallet. And it was like a randomly generated one, so no one could just find that URL on their own. And the Bitcoin that you would send in and out was held in the browser keys according to that URL. It was super easy, low friction, amazing. And people really used it a lot for like a year. And then something happened with Google's search algorithms where it started indexing these URLs. And all the Bitcoins got stolen. And that was the end of InstaWallet. So...
So fast forward, Shapeshift was a response to Mt. Gox, right? So
yeah,
is that accurate?
Mt. Gox imploded in late 2013, I think. And Mt. Gox was the Bitcoin exchange of the world. It was like 95% of all Bitcoin trading volume. And when it went down, it was something like $400 million of Bitcoin was lost. And that was a huge portion of the whole market cap and industry. Again, everyone in the world was saying, Bitcoin's done. Like, what a scam. Very depressing. And I wanted to create a way to do exchange without custody. and it was always clear to me that like the custody was the risk, and it didn't matter like if you have to trust the people behind a system, you're basically just back in the TradFi world, and sometimes people are trustworthy and sometimes not, but the magic of crypto is that you can actually remove yourself from a situation where you have to trust anyone. So we built Shapeshift to not hold people's funds and to not hold their personal information. We called it like safety by design, where we would just protect people by the way that the app was built. So yeah, that was 2014, and had some great years after that as Ethereum launched and all this huge preponderance of different digital assets emerged. And yeah, that was 8 years of my life until we decentralized it in 2021.
Amazing. I mean, it's fair to say like Shapeshift was a foundation for Uniswap, right? I don't think people understood what a self-custodial experience would look like without Shapeshift. So remarkable. So fast forward. So what are your thoughts right now? Now you're exclusively focused on AI, right? So you know, your writings about separation of state and money had a lot of influence on a lot of the industry. And why AI? Why do you think now is the time we should decentralize AI?
Yeah, well, so again, I'm not an AI person. I don't have a background in like machine learning or any of the important skills that one might need for AI. But I've seen how powerful the tools are, and they're obviously getting much more powerful. I think there's a very bright future ahead for humanity when it can leverage machine intelligence to this degree. And the AI stuff, generative AI in particular, was just an interest of mine as a hobby. And I started realizing, you know, as you use the chat GPTs of the world, and you start realizing that the answers that are coming back to you aren't actually machine intelligence, but there's some like human censorship going on and like guardrails going in, and it's not clear like what's coming from the machine and what's coming from the human. And I started realizing that like, okay, if there's a few of these big tech companies offering the AI products, not only will we be subordinate to the whims of the company, more dangerously, in my opinion, we are subject to the whims of whatever regulators are overseeing that company. And it doesn't take a lot of imagination to consider a future world that's not far, 5, 10, 15 years in the future, where governments of the world utilize these AI systems to control how people think. And to me, that was absolutely unacceptable. And of course, I don't know anything about AI, but I do know about decentralized systems. And so if you're going to create like AI systems that aren't subject to some kind of central monolithic authority, it has to be done on a foundation of decentralization. It has to be done with a foundation of cryptocurrency, blockchains, and permissionless systems, which is something I know about. And so I got involved in building the Morpheus network, and through that realized there was actually like an important consumer app that needed to be built, ChatGPT without censorship. So that's what Venice is, and been working on that, for six months or so.
Amazing. I've used Venice. I mean, I use Venice actually quite a lot now. Just the aspect of my chats not being monitored and the aspect that I get back results that are not biased is a very important aspect to me. And I'm using it more and more. And I love the app. And what is the future? How are you thinking about, two aspects? How do you see broader adoption for a decentralized system? Also, how do you see the competition shaping, especially with ChatGPT, GPT-O, and all those new things coming and really innovating?
Yeah, I saw basically like there were two sides of the open source product, of the AI product world. One, which most people are using, was large centralized companies, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, these firms, and they were getting a highly curated, censored, but very easy to use, very performant, very excellent product, but subject to all of the restrictions both today and into the future. That's what most people were using. And then on the other side, there was this whole big world of open source AI, which was very cool and very diverse, but also very messy. And you didn't have to be like intensely technical to use that stuff, but you had to be a little technical, and a little technical is too much for 8 billion of the people on Earth. So I realized, like, okay, well, let's just take some of the biggest, best open source tools and build an app that works as nicely as the ChatGPTs of the world. It's actually not that hard to do that. There's some amazing open source technology out there, and I think we all have to give Meta a lot of credit for releasing the leading frontier open source LLM. Hopefully, they will continue doing that. And so, yeah, Venice's position is basically like an app that feels like a centralized SaaS product in its smoothness, efficiency, like customer service, friendliness, but which is completely permissionless, uncensored, and decentralized in the important components in the back end. This is where we use Akash servers for a lot of the compute, and that's the basic niche that we're going for. So someone who wants the basic usability of ChatGPT without getting spied on or censored, that's our market.
Amazing. And it means very obviously see OpenAI sucking the air out of the room every time they launch features, and you're seeing this centralized AI getting powerful, right, by the month. As in fact, and how do you see open source competing? What do you see so far working with these open source models in terms of how good they get, and is there an inflection point where open source gets better than closed source? Are we there yet, or if not, when do you see us getting there?
Yeah, so what got me initially interested in this stuff was David with the Morpheus project, and he was describing to me how like a couple years ago the open source models were nowhere near as good as the centralized ones, but that they were catching up quickly, and he's like, within 6 months they'll be somewhat on par, and it's plausible that they will actually surpass the centralized models. And that has come to pass. Llama 3 is in the league of the centralized models in terms of most people's use cases. So, building on that, we were just able to like create much of the same experience using that open source technology. And what people need to be aware of, we're in this kind of like, I don't know, maybe a honeymoon period, where we have this preponderance of good open source AI models, but we have a huge risk, which is that Meta and or one or two other companies that are producing these leading open source models stop. If they stop, that's a big problem. And the hope is that the decentralized AI community is able to figure out how to do relatively efficient training of models in a decentralized way. So to train a model in a decentralized way today is completely impractical and inefficient. It can technically be done, but never at a scale that can compete with a centralized data center. If that is solvable, then we're good. If that's solvable, then we're good. And so I think that's like the most important problem that people in this space can be trying to solve: how to do relatively efficient, decentralized model training. And if that can happen before the Metas of the world stop releasing their frontier models open source, then we have a very good future ahead of us. If that doesn't happen before those companies stop releasing the open source models, then we have a possibly very dystopian future in front of us.
Amazing. I think we're seeing a lot of progress in the decentralized training space. I'm very, very positive, especially a lot of the research papers that are coming out, like Dialogue Co and whatnot, that propose training on heterogeneous, heavily distributed compute. So it seems to be promising. With that, I'll open up the audience for questions.
If you have a question, please just exit the row and go to the back microphone.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for sharing. And as an OG in crypto and soon to be OG in AI, and so I'm just curious about like. So I guess like your thinking certainly shaped a lot of stuff that you read. So could you share with us like what are the most influential stuff that you have ever read in your life, and also like nowadays, right? So like what are you constantly reading? What is actually grabbing your attention? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I have to say the most influential book I've ever read is Atlas Shrugged. which might sound a little cheesy to some people, but one of the greatest pieces of fiction that captures like a spirit of man that is too often minimized and dismissed by most literature. And it is a heroic poem, essentially, to the importance of the individual person against the collective. And if you read that book, it's hard not to. It was written, in the '60s, late '50s, early '60s. It's hard to feel that it is fiction, because so many of the things that seem silly in that book are actually like happening, and you can see this all around you. So that book was huge. A much shorter one in nonfiction, What Has Government Done to Our Money by Rothbard. You can read that in an afternoon, and that essentially describes the process, which isn't some conspiracy or not even necessarily intentional, but just the mechanical game theory way by which governments ended up wresting control of money from the market where it had been before, and how distortive and corrupting that process is. So yeah, I would say those two books. What about now? What do I read? I've been trying to read like some of the early AI history stuff, and you joked that I might be an OG in AI now, which is definitely not true, because the AI stuff has been going on, for 70 years, since the 50s and 60s, and it's amazing how, I think us in the crypto world feel like we've been working on this stuff for so long, and like, why hasn't it taken over the world yet? But the AI people, I will say, have been working on it for far longer, and just in the last 5 years have really started having their time in the spotlight. And so I've been trying to learn about some of that early history, and it's cool to like learn about computing systems on those fundamental levels back when the computers themselves were simpler. So that's been a lot of my reading lately.
Yeah, I have a degree in AI from 20 years ago. It's just completely different now. None of that stuff is useful. Any other questions? Got a question. Time for one more question. I think we can wrap up.
What would you say is the biggest risk Akash faces?
Question to me?
Yeah, or either of you.
Biggest risk Akash faces. Oof. There are lots of risks, but I think the biggest one would be Akash is too early right now to be shut down by regulation. I think if regulation is out of our way, I think Akash is unstoppable. But if regulation comes and basically says you cannot exist, I think that's going to be a big problem. So that would be the biggest risk, because all of us are builders. I feel like if you're a builder, you can build as long as you're allowed to build. We'll build our way out of any problems. We have that confidence, but if you're not allowed to build, that'll be a problem. Yeah. All right, with that, we can wrap up. Round of applause for Eric.
Thank you.